in the frozen silence of Earth's southernmost reaches, where temperatures plummet to -130 degrees Fahrenheit and winds scream across vast ice sheets at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour, lies a continent that has captivated human imagination for centuries. Antarctica, a land so hostile, so unforgiving, that it remained the last place on Earth where humans dared to plant their flags. This is the story of how humanity conquered the final frontier on our own planet, a tale of extraordinary courage, devastating tragedy, and scientific triumph that spans more than 2 centuries. Long before any human eye had witnessed the white desert of Antarctica, the ancient Greeks theorized its existence. They called it Terra Australis, incognita, the unknown southern land. The great minds of antiquity, including Aristotle, believed that a massive landmass must exist in the far south to balance the known continents of the northern hemisphere. For them, the world required symmetry, and this mysterious southern continent was essential to maintaining Earth's equilibrium. But theory and reality are separated by one crucial element: proof. And proof would require someone brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to sail into the most dangerous waters on the planet. The quest to find this mythical land began in earnest during the Age of Exploration. Captain James Cook, the legendary British navigator who had already mapped vast portions of the Pacific Ocean, set his sights on the unknown south in 1770. Cook was a man of extraordinary skill and determination, having survived countless voyages into uncharted waters. But even he had never encountered anything like what awaited him in the Southern Ocean. His ships, the Resolution and Adventure, pushed further south than any European vessel had ventured before. They crossed the Antarctic Circle on January 17, 1773, becoming the first ships in recorded history to do so. Cook and his crew found themselves in a realm of nightmares. Massive icebergs, some as large as islands, drifted through fog-shrouded seas. The cold was unlike anything they had experienced, penetrating through every layer of clothing, turning ropes stiff as iron and making simple tasks aboard ship an ordeal of frozen fingers and numbed minds. The ship's timbers groaned under the assault of pack ice, and more than once, Cook's vessels came perilously close to being crushed between moving ice floes. The crew watched in terror as their ships were surrounded by ice walls that towered above the masts, blocking out the weak Antarctic sun. The psychological toll was immense. Sailors, superstitious by nature, began to whisper that they had sailed to the edge of the world, that these frozen waters were cursed, that no man was meant to venture here. For 3 years, Cook circumnavigated the Antarctic region, pushing as far south as latitude 71 degrees 10 minutes. He encountered the massive ice barriers that guard the continent, impenetrable walls of ice that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. These barriers, later known as ice shelves, were unlike anything in European experience. They rose from the sea like cliffs of blue-white crystal, some of them hundreds of feet tall, stretching along the horizon for what seemed like infinity. Cook's men could hear the ice groaning and cracking, a deep rumbling that came from within the frozen mass itself, as if the ice were a living thing, breathing and moving. But despite all his efforts, Cook never saw the land itself. The ice defeated even this master navigator. When Cook finally returned to England in 1775, exhausted and frustrated, he wrote words that would discourage explorers for decades. "I can be bold to say that no man will ever venture further than I have done, and that the lands which may lie to the south will never be explored." Cook believed he had found the edge of an uninhabitable ice world, not a continent. He described a region so desolate, so devoid of any resource or strategic value, that he could conceive of no reason why anyone would want to return. He was wrong about the impossibility of further exploration, but his reputation was so immense that few dared to challenge his conclusion. For nearly 50 years, Cook's pessimistic assessment cast a shadow over Antarctic exploration. Yet human curiosity, and more importantly, human greed, is not so easily suppressed. In the decades following Cook's voyages, seal hunters and whalers began pushing into the Southern Ocean, driven not by scientific curiosity or national glory, but by profit. These were hard men, accustomed to danger and deprivation. Men who had spent their lives battling the sea in small wooden ships. They cared nothing for geographical theories or national prestige. They wanted sealskins and whale oil, and they would go wherever these commodities could be found, regardless of the danger. In doing so, They would become the unlikely pioneers of Antarctic exploration. Men whose names would never be celebrated in history books, but whose collective courage would open the door to the last continent. The seal hunters worked in brutal conditions that make modern Antarctic expeditions look comfortable by comparison. They landed on subantarctic islands, where millions of seals congregated to breed. Islands with names that reflected their bleakness. Desolation Island, Herd Island, the South Shetlands. The men would camp on these rocky, wind-swept shores for months at a time, living in crude stone huts, their only protection against the howling Antarctic winds. They would club the seals to death by the thousands, skin them where they lay, and cure the skins in salt. The work was backbreaking and bloody. Men lost fingers and toes to frostbite. Ships were crushed in the ice. Their crews left stranded on desolate islands with no hope of rescue. But the money was good, extraordinarily good, and that was enough to keep the men coming back year after year. The slaughter was systematic and merciless. Within years, entire seal populations were decimated. Islands that had once been home to millions of seals were left barren. The beaches stained with blood, the rocks littered with bones. The hunters, having exhausted the seal populations in one area, were forced to venture ever further south in search of new hunting grounds. They began exploring the channels and bays of the Antarctic Peninsula, mapping the coastline not for science, but for profit, searching for the next untouched seal colony. These men developed an intimate knowledge of Antarctic waters, learning to read the ice, to predict the weather, to survive in conditions that would kill less experienced sailors within hours. It was one of these sealing expeditions that would achieve what Cook could not. On January 27th, 1820, a young American sealer named Nathaniel Palmer was commanding the small sloop, Hero in waters south of the South Shetland Islands. Palmer was just 21 years old, but he was already a veteran of these dangerous waters, having made several voyages to the subantarctic islands. His ship, the Hero, was tiny, just 47 feet long, barely larger than a modern yacht, but it was maneuverable and could navigate through ice-choked waters where larger ships would be trapped. On that summer day in the Antarctic, Palmer and his crew were searching for new sealing grounds when they sighted something extraordinary. A dark, mountainous coastline rising from the ice, stretching as far as the eye could see. They had found the Antarctic Peninsula, the long finger of land that reaches north from the main Antarctic continent toward South America. But Palmer's discovery was not unique, and here the story becomes complicated, tangled in the web of national pride and competing claims that would characterize Antarctic exploration for the next century. Around the same time Palmer was sailing these waters, Russian explorer Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen, commanding a well-equipped expedition sent by Tsar Alexander I, was also exploring the Antarctic region. Bellingshausen was no sealer searching for profit. He was a professional naval officer, a veteran of the Russian Imperial Navy, and his expedition was a matter of national prestige. He had been sailing the Antarctic region for months, systematically charting the coastline and ice barriers with the precision expected of a Russian officer. On January 28, 1820, just one day after Palmer's sighting, Bellingshausen recorded seeing land in the same area. The question of who truly discovered Antarctica first remains contentious to this day, a source of debate among historians and a matter of national pride for Americans, Russians, and British alike. Some historians credit Bellingshausen with the discovery, pointing to his detailed logs and professional credentials. Others champion Palmer, celebrating the young American's daring, and still others point to British naval officer Edward Bransfield, who claimed to have sighted the Antarctic Peninsula on January 30th, 1820, just days after both Palmer and Bellingshausen. The truth is that all three men saw the continent within days of each other, none fully realizing the magnitude of what they had found. They had discovered not just another island or ice shelf, but an entire continent, the fifth largest on Earth, larger than Europe or Australia, buried beneath ice that in some places measured more than 3 miles thick. It was a discovery that would change our understanding of the planet itself and set in motion a race to explore and claim this frozen wilderness that continues to this day. The discovery of Antarctica in 1820 opened a new chapter in human exploration, but it did not immediately spark the rush of expeditions that one might expect. The continent was too remote, too dangerous, and seemingly too worthless to attract much attention from the great powers of Europe. while the seal hunters continued their grim work on the subantarctic islands, slowly pushing further south in search of new colonies to exploit. The scientific community remained largely indifferent to this frozen wasteland at the bottom of the world. But there were exceptions. Visionaries who understood that Antarctica represented not just a geographical curiosity but a key to understanding the planet itself. One such visionary was Charles Wilkes, a lieutenant in the United States Navy who would lead the first American expedition, specifically designed to explore the Antarctic coast. Wilkes was an ambitious man, some would say arrogant, but he possessed the determination necessary for Antarctic exploration. In 1830 he departed from Virginia with 6 ships and a crew of nearly 350 men. The expedition was grandly named the United States Exploring Expedition, and its mission was nothing less than to circumnavigate the globe, with particular attention to be paid to the mysterious southern continent. Wilkes was under orders to sail as far south as possible, and to determine once and for all whether Antarctica was a continuous landmass, or merely a collection of islands, locked together by ice. The expedition that followed would test every man aboard to his absolute limits. Wilkes drove his ships into the pack ice, again and again, pushing south whenever a lead in the ice appeared, retreating when the ice threatened to crush his wooden vessels. His flagship, the Vincennes, was repeatedly battered by storms and ice. 2 of his smaller vessels were so badly damaged that they had to be abandoned. The crew suffered terribly from the cold and from scurvy, that scourge of long sea voyages. Men's teeth fell out, their gums turned black, their legs swelled until they could barely walk. Some went mad from the monotony and the fear. And yet Wilkes pressed on, driven by an obsession to prove that Antarctica was indeed a continent. For months during the Antarctic summer of 1839 to 1840, Wilkes sailed along the coast of what is now known as Wilkes Land, a section of East Antarctica. He meticulously mapped over 1,500 miles of coastline, proving beyond doubt that Antarctica was not just a series of islands, but a vast continental landmass. But Wilkes made a critical error that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He claimed to have seen land at certain points where later expeditions would prove that only ice existed. Whether this was deliberate fraud, as some accused, or honest mistakes made in the treacherous conditions of Antarctic navigation, where ice and cloud and land can blur into an indistinguishable white mass, remains unclear. When Wilkes returned to America in 1842, instead of being hailed as a hero, he found himself facing a court-martial for mistreating his crew. He was acquitted of most charges, but his reputation was permanently tarnished. The maps he produced, however, would prove invaluable to future explorers, even if some of the details were questionable. While Wilkes was battling ice and his own demons in the Pacific sector of Antarctica, another expedition was achieving even more spectacular results on the opposite side of the continent. James Clark Ross was everything Wilkes was not. A gentleman, a respected scientist, and an experienced polar explorer who had already made his name in the Arctic. Ross had located the North Magnetic Pole in 1831, and now he set his sights on finding its southern counterpart. In 1839, he departed England with 2 ships, the Erebus and the Terror, names that would become legendary in the annals of polar exploration. These were not ordinary vessels. They were bomb ships, originally designed to withstand the recoil of heavy mortars, which meant their hulls were extraordinarily strong. Ross had them further reinforced with extra planking and iron plates, making them perhaps the strongest wooden ships ever built. Ross's expedition to Antarctica was a masterclass in polar exploration. Unlike Wilkes, who seemed to rely on brute force and stubbornness, Ross combined careful planning with bold action. He avoided the pack ice that had plagued earlier expeditions by approaching Antarctica from a different direction, sailing south from New Zealand into what is now known as the Ross Sea. On January 5th, his ships crossed the Antarctic Circle, and soon afterward, Ross made a discovery that would astound the world. Where other explorers had found only ice barriers and impenetrable pack ice, Ross found open water, a vast sea that allowed him to sail further south than anyone had gone before. As his ships pushed south through this unexpected ocean, Ross and his crew witnessed sights that seemed to belong more to fantasy than reality. On January 11th, they sighted land, but it was land unlike anything they had seen before. 2 massive volcanic mountains rose from the ice, one of them actively erupting, spewing smoke and fire into the Antarctic sky. Ross named them Mount Erebus and Mount Terra, after his ships. Mount Erebus, at over 12,000 feet tall, is the southernmost active volcano on Earth, a mountain of fire rising from a continent of ice. The crew watched in awe as lava glowed red against the white landscape, as ash fell on the ice like black snow. It was a reminder that Antarctica, despite its frozen appearance, was geologically alive, a dynamic landscape shaped by forces deep within the Earth. But Ross's most significant discovery came days later. As the ships continued south, they encountered what appeared to be a range of white cliffs stretching across the horizon. As they drew closer, the crew realized these were not cliffs at all, but a wall of ice rising directly from the sea, a barrier that extended as far east and west as they could see. This was the Ross Ice Shelf, a floating platform of ice the size of France, hundreds of feet thick, its face rising up to 200 feet above the water. Ross sailed along this ice barrier for weeks, searching for a way through, but found none. The ice shelf was impenetrable. He had reached the furthest point south that any ship could sail. Beyond this barrier lay the Antarctic interior, a mystery that would not be solved for another 60 years. Ross returned to Antarctica the following summer, and again the summer after that, each time mapping more of the coastline, each time pushing a little further south. His expeditions were remarkably successful by any measure. He had discovered the Ross Sea, the Ross Ice Shelf, and the volcanoes of Ross Island. He had sailed further south than any previous explorer, reaching 78 degrees south latitude. His careful observations and meticulous charts would serve as the foundation for all future Antarctic exploration. And perhaps most importantly, he brought all his men home alive and healthy, a feat almost unheard of in polar exploration of that era. When Ross returned to England in 1843, he was knighted for his achievements. He had proven that, with proper preparation, strong ships, and careful leadership, Antarctica could be explored and survived. The expeditions of Wilkes and Ross marked the end of what historians call the first phase of Antarctic exploration. They had proven that Antarctica was a continent, not just a mass of ice. They had mapped significant portions of its coastline. They had shown that the continent was surrounded by a treacherous sea filled with ice, storms, and dangers beyond imagination, but that it could be navigated by skilled sailors in strong ships. Most importantly, they had revealed that Antarctica held secrets worth discovering, mysteries that would draw explorers back again and again. But after Ross's return in 1843, interest in Antarctica waned. The continent had been found, its general outline mapped. What more was there to do? The great powers of Europe were focused on other matters, on wars and industrial expansion, and the colonization of more hospitable lands. Antarctica, it seemed, had nothing to offer humanity. For the next 50 years, Antarctica was largely forgotten by the wider world. The seal hunters continued their work, though the seal populations were now so depleted that the industry was dying. A few whaling expeditions ventured into Antarctic waters, hunting the great whales that fed in the cold, nutrient-rich seas. But systematic exploration ceased. The continent sat alone at the bottom of the world, shrouded in ice and darkness for half the year, its interior completely unknown. Maps showed the coastline that Ross and Wilkes had charted, but the interior was blank, marked only with the words unexplored or simply left white. No one knew what lay beyond the ice shelves, beyond the coastal mountains. No one knew how thick the ice was, or if there was even land beneath it. Some scientists speculated that Antarctica might be not one continent but several islands covered by a single massive ice sheet. No one knew the truth, and for half a century, no one seemed particularly interested in finding out. But beneath the surface, forces were building that would soon thrust Antarctica back into the spotlight. Science was changing, becoming more systematic, more international. Scientists were beginning to understand that, to truly comprehend how the Earth worked, they needed to study its most extreme environments. They needed to understand how ice ages formed, how ocean currents circulated, how the Earth's magnetic field functioned. And all those questions pointed to Antarctica. At the same time, a new breed of explorer was emerging. Men who sought glory not through conquest or colonization, but through being first, through pushing human endurance to its absolute limits. These men looked at the blank interior of Antarctica and saw not a wasteland, but the ultimate challenge, the last great prize in terrestrial exploration. The stage was being set for what would become known as the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, an era that would see some of the greatest acts of courage and some of the most heartbreaking tragedies in human history. The spark that reignited interest in Antarctica came from an unexpected source: a gathering of scientists in London. In 1895, The Sixth International Geographical Congress met to discuss the state of global exploration. As the delegates reviewed maps of the world, they realized with some embarrassment that while virtually every other region of Earth had been explored and mapped, Antarctica remained almost completely unknown. The interior of the continent was a blank space on the map, larger than the Amazon rainforest or the Sahara Desert. Humanity knew absolutely nothing about it. The Congress issued a declaration that would change everything. The exploration of the Antarctic regions is the greatest piece of geographical exploration still to be undertaken. This was a direct challenge to the explorers and nations of the world, and it would not go unanswered. The first to respond was a Belgian, Adrien de Gerlath, a naval officer with limited polar experience but unlimited ambition. In 1897, de Gerlath set sail from Antwerp aboard the Belgica with an international crew that included a young Norwegian named Roald Amundsen, who was serving as first mate, and an American doctor named Frederick Cook. De Gerlath's expedition had scientific objectives, but like many explorers of his era, he was also motivated by a desire for glory. His plan was to sail into Antarctic waters, conduct scientific observations, and return before the onset of winter. It was a reasonable plan, but in Antarctica, plans have a way of going catastrophically wrong. The Belgica reached the Antarctic Peninsula in January 1898 and spent weeks exploring the coastline, charting islands and channels, collecting scientific data. But de Gerlath made a fatal miscalculation. He lingered too long, pushing his explorations into late February and then into March, when the Antarctic summer was ending and the sea ice was beginning to form. Perhaps he was hoping for one more discovery, one more island to name. Perhaps he simply misjudged how quickly the ice would close in. Whatever his reasoning, by early March the Belgica found itself trapped in pack ice in the Bellingshausen Sea, and no amount of effort could free her. The ice had locked around the ship like a vice, and it would not release its grip for 13 months. What followed was a nightmare that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. The Belgica became the first ship to winter in Antarctic waters, an achievement that no one had sought and that brought no glory, only suffering. As the days grew shorter and the temperatures plummeted, the crew found themselves imprisoned in a wooden ship, surrounded by an infinite plain of ice, hundreds of miles from any hope of rescue. The sun disappeared below the horizon in May and would not return until July, leaving the men in total darkness for 2 months. This was not the gentle darkness of a northern winter, where the moon and stars provide some illumination. This was absolute, crushing darkness, broken only by the feeble light of oil lamps aboard the ship. The psychological effects of the darkness were devastating. Men who had been cheerful and optimistic in the summer became morose and withdrawn. They stopped speaking to each other, spending their days lying in their bunks, staring at nothing. Some began to show signs of madness, talking to themselves, seeing things that were not there. The ship's cat, the crew's only companion, died, and grown men wept at its funeral. They held a burial service on the ice, and as they stood in the howling wind, reading prayers over a frozen cat, it was Frederick Cook, the American doctor, who saved them. Cook recognized that the crew was dying not just from scurvy, but from what we would now call seasonal affective disorder and depression. He insisted that the men force themselves to exercise, to leave their bunks and walk on the ice beside the ship, even when every instinct told them to stay huddled in their dark cabins. He had the crew light fires on the ice and gather around them, the flickering flames providing not just warmth but a focus for human interaction. Most importantly, Cook began hunting seals and penguins and forcing the men to eat fresh meat. Even though many of them found the idea of eating these animals repulsive, the fresh meat provided the vitamin C they needed to combat scurvy. Slowly, grudgingly, the crew began to recover. When the sun finally returned in July, rising above the horizon for just a few minutes each day, it was like a resurrection. The men wept at the sight of that weak Antarctic sun. They embraced each other, laughing and crying at the same time. They had survived the darkness, but they were not yet free. The ice held the Belgica in its grip for months more. It was not until February 1899, more than a year after they had become trapped, that the ice finally began to break up. Using saws and explosives, the crew cut a channel through the ice, working day and night in a desperate race against time. If they did not free the ship before the ice solidified again for another winter, they would all surely die. Finally, on February 14th, the Belgica broke free and sailed into open water. The crew had survived, but barely. They limped back to Belgium, their ship damaged, their health broken, their minds scarred by what they had endured. The story of the Belgica was a warning about the dangers of Antarctic exploration, but it did not discourage others. Instead, it seemed to attract them. The Belgian expedition had proven that humans could survive in Antarctic winter, even if the experience drove some of them mad. More importantly, it showed that with proper preparation and determination, the Antarctic interior might be reached. The race for the South Pole was about to begin in earnest, and it would be led by men who had learned the lessons of the Belgica's terrible winter. Among those men was Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian first mate who had served aboard the Belgica. Amundsen had paid close attention during that long winter. He had learned from Frederick Cook's methods of combating scurvy and depression. He had learned that survival in Antarctica required meticulous planning, that improvisation was the enemy of success in polar regions. He had learned that one must respect the environment, must adapt to it rather than trying to fight it. These lessons would serve him well in the years to come, though he could not have known it at the time. For now, Amundsen was just a young officer, unknown beyond Norway, with dreams of polar exploration but no means to achieve them. That would change, but not yet. The turn of the century saw an explosion of Antarctic expeditions. It was as if the floodgates had opened, releasing a tide of explorers who descended upon the continent from all directions. There was a German expedition led by Eric von Drygalski, a British expedition led by Robert Falkenskaw, a Scottish expedition led by William Bruce, and a Swedish expedition led by Otto Nordenskjöld. Each expedition had scientific objectives. Each planned to map unexplored regions, collect specimens, make observations. But beneath the scientific veneer, there was another motivation: national pride. Antarctica had become a proving ground where nations could demonstrate their superiority, where the flags of empires could be planted in virgin territory. It was imperialism in its purest form, played out on a continent too hostile for permanent settlement, but too valuable symbolically to be ignored. Robert Falkenskaw's discovery expedition of 1901 to 1904 would set the pattern for British Antarctic exploration for the next decade. Scott was a Royal Navy officer, brave and determined, but with no polar experience whatsoever. He had been selected to lead the expedition not because of his qualifications, but because of his connections and his ambition. His ship, the Discovery, was specially built for polar work. Solid and strong, but also slow and difficult to maneuver. Scott established a base camp on Ross Island, at a place he named Hut Point, in sight of Mount Erebus, with its perpetual plume of volcanic smoke. From Bossa Scott and his men would launch a series of exploratory journeys into the interior of Antarctica. Journeys that would reveal both the possibilities and the perils of Antarctic exploration. Scott's first attempt to reach the South Pole, undertaken in November 1902 with Ernest Shackleton and Edward Wilson, was a disaster averted only by luck and determination. The three men, pulling sledges loaded with supplies and accompanied by 19 dogs, set out across the Ross ice shelf heading south. They were inadequately prepared for what they would face. Scott had no experience with dogs and did not know how to care for them properly. The animals were overworked and underfed, and one by one they collapsed and died. The men were forced to relay their loads, pulling one sledge forward, then returning for the other, doubling the distance they had to travel. They developed scurvy because Scott had not brought enough fresh or preserved meat. Shackleton became seriously ill, coughing up blood, barely able to walk. They reached 82 degrees south, further south than any human had been before, but they were still almost 500 miles from the pole, and they were dying. The return journey was a race against death. Shackleton, desperately ill, could barely pull his own weight on the sledge. Scott and Wilson had to drag him along with the supplies. They ran out of food and had to kill and eat the last of their dogs, choking down her raw dog meat, because they did not have enough fuel to cook it properly. They suffered from snow blindness, their eyes burning as if filled with hot sand. The pain so intense that they could only travel for short periods, before having to rest in darkness. When they finally staggered back to the Discovery on February 3rd, 1903, they had been gone for 93 days and had covered over 960 miles. They had not reached the pole, but they had proven that it was possible to penetrate deep into the Antarctic interior and return alive. They had also learned the hard truth that Antarctica does not forgive mistakes, that every error in judgment, every moment of carelessness, could mean the difference between life and death. Ernest Shackleton returned to England from Scott's discovery expedition a broken man. His lungs damaged, his health shattered, and his reputation tarnished. Scott had sent him home early, citing medical reasons. But many whispered it was because Shackleton had shown weakness during the southern journey. For a proud man like Shackleton, these whispers were unbearable. He had something to prove, and Antarctica would be his proving ground. Wheaton Shackleton was planning his return to the ice. He would lead his own expedition, and this time he would reach the South Pole. It took Shackleton 4 years to raise the money and organize his expedition. He was not wealthy, and fundraising was a constant struggle. Finally, in August 1907, his ship Nimrod sailed from England. Shackleton's expedition was different from Scott's in crucial ways. Where Scott had been methodical and cautious, Shackleton was bold and improvisational. Where Scott relied on naval discipline and hierarchy, Shackleton led through personal charisma and inspiration. His crew adored him, would have followed him anywhere, and that loyalty would be tested to its limits in the months to come. Shackleton established his base camp at Cape Royds on Ross Island. From Cape Royds, Shackleton and 3 companions, Frank Wild, Eric Marshall, and Jameson Adams, set out for the pole. They had 4 ponies to help pull the sledges, animals Shackleton believed superior to dogs. It was a decision both inspired and disastrous. The journey south began well, but ponies are not Arctic animals. As they climbed onto the polar plateau, the ponies began to fail. One by one they had to be shot, their meat cached for the return journey. By the time they reached the polar plateau, all ponies were gone. But still they pushed on, day after exhausting day, into regions where no human had ever ventured. They crossed 85 degrees south, then 86, then 87. Each degree was won through pure determination. They were traveling across the highest, coldest, windiest desert on Earth, a plateau of ice 2 miles above sea level. The cold was unlike anything they had experienced before. Temperatures dropping 240 below 0 Fahrenheit and lower. Their clothing was woefully inadequate. By late December, the men were starving. They had calculated their food supplies with precision, but the calculations were wrong. They were burning far more energy than anticipated, and the rations were simply insufficient. Their bodies began to consume themselves, leaving them gaunt and skeletal. Frostbite blackened their fingers and toes. On January 9th, 1909, at 88 degrees 23 minutes south, Shackleton made the hardest decision of his life. He called a halt. They could go no farther. Their food was nearly exhausted, and they still had to make the return journey. If they continued to the pole, they would never make it back alive. Shackleton gathered his companions and spoke words that would define his legacy. "I thought you'd rather have a live donkey than a dead lion." He had learned something that Scott never fully grasped, that the goal was not worth the cost of his men's lives, that getting home was part of the job. The return journey was a desperate race against starvation. They marched until they could barely stand. Wild developed dysentery, and Marshall's frostbitten feet turned gangrenous. On February 23rd, 1909, they staggered into Hut Point, where the Nimrod was waiting. They had been gone 128 days, and had traveled over 1,800 miles. They had come closer to the South Pole than any human in history, but they had not reached it. Shackleton's reaction to his near success was telling. When people congratulated him on coming so close, he responded simply, "A live donkey's better than a dead lion, isn't it?" He had brought all his men home alive. Not a single member of his expedition had died, a record almost unheard of in polar exploration of that era. That someone else was already planning. In Norway, Roald Amundsen was preparing his own expedition. Amundsen had originally planned to be the first to reach the North Pole, but in September 1909, he received devastating news. Robert Peary claimed to have reached the North Pole. Amundsen realized that the last great prize in exploration was now the South Pole. He made a decision that would shock the world and infuriate the British Ewald Rasse. Scott, to the South Pole. Robert Falcon Scott was also planning a return to Antarctica. Scott had been devastated when Shackleton came so close to the pole, stealing what Scott considered his personal goal. He began organizing what he called the Terra Nova expedition, a massive undertaking, with scientific research as its stated objective, but with the South Pole as its real goal. Scott was meticulous in his planning, perhaps too meticulous. What Scott did not know was that Amundsen was planning to reach the pole first. Amundsen had publicly announced he was heading to the Arctic. But secretly, he had changed his plans. Only when his ship, the Fram, reached Madeira did he tell his men the truth. They were going south, not north, and they were going to beat the British to the pole. Scott received a telegram from Amundsen in October 1910, while the Terra Nova was en route to Antarctica. The message was brief and devastating. Beg leave to inform you from proceeding Antarctic. Amundsen Scott was stunned. Now he was in a race, and the Norwegian was already ahead. Amundsen had established his base camp at the Bay of Whales, on the Ross Ice Shelf, about 60 miles closer to the pole than Scott's base at Cape Evans. Every mile mattered. The race for the South Pole, the most dramatic contest in the history of exploration, had begun. The winter of 1911 was spent in preparation. At Cape Evans, Scott and his team conducted scientific experiments and planned their route. Scott's approach was complex, involving multiple support parties, motor sledges, ponies, dogs, and man-hauling. It was an elaborate scheme, and it would prove to be fatally flawed. At the Bay of Whales, Amundsen's preparation was entirely different. He focused on one thing: getting to the pole and back as quickly and efficiently as possible. He would use dogs, and only dogs, to pull the sledges. Amundsen had learned from the Inuit. He understood that in the polar regions, speed and simplicity were essential, that elaborate plans were liabilities, not assets. October 19th, 1911. At the Bay of Whales, Roald Amundsen and 4 companions departed for the South Pole. The party consisted of Amundsen himself, Olav Halland, Elmer Hansen, Sverre Hassel, and Oscar Wisting. These were not scientists or naval officers, but Norwegian skiers and dog handlers, men who had spent their lives in cold climates. They had 4 sledges pulled by 52 dogs, and they moved with a speed that would have astonished Scott. On good days, they covered 20 miles or more. Amundsen had planned every detail with obsessive precision. His sledges were lighter than Scott's, his supplies more carefully chosen, his clothing better adapted to the cold. He wore furs, not wool, understanding that the Inuit had solved the problem of polar clothing thousands of years ago. The Norwegian route took them up a previously unknown glacier, which Amundsen named the Axel Heiberg Glacier. The ascent was treacherous, with crevasses hidden beneath thin snow bridges. But the Norwegians were experienced mountaineers, and they navigated the glacier with skill and confidence. Once on the polar plateau, they pushed south at a relentless pace. The dogs were performing magnificently, but Amundsen had made a cold calculation from the beginning. The dogs were not just transportation, they were also food. Amundsen had them shot and fed to the remaining dogs, and to the men. It was brutal, but practical. In Antarctica, sentiment is a luxury that can get you killed. Meanwhile, Scott's expedition was struggling. They had departed Cape Evans on November 1st, 1911, 2 weeks after Amundsen. But they were moving much more slowly. The motor sledges, which Scott had hoped would revolutionize polar travel, broke down almost immediately, leaving them to be abandoned on the ice. The ponies, like Shackleton's before them, were suffering terribly in the cold and the altitude. They sank deep into the soft snow with each step. By the time Scott's party reached the Beardmore Glacier in early December, all the ponies had been shot, and the men were hauling the sledges themselves. Scott's party consisted of 17 men when they left Cape Evans, organized into multiple teams. The plan was for support parties to turn back at predetermined points, but this strategy meant that the polar party would have to man-haul their sledges for the final portion of the journey, pulling hundreds of pounds of supplies across the polar plateau. It was exhausting work, made worse by the altitude and the cold. The men were gasping in the thin air, their lungs burning with each breath. They were making 10 to 12 miles per day at best, less than half the speed of Amundsen's dog teams. On December 14th, 1911, at 3 in the afternoon, Roald Amundsen and his 4 companions reached the South Pole. They had been traveling for 57 days and had covered about 870 miles from their base camp. The Norwegians planted the Norwegian flag in the ice. Amundsen had brought a tent, which they erected at the pole, and inside it they left a letter addressed to Scott, along with a letter to the King of Norway. The Norwegians spent 3 days at the pole, taking observations to confirm their position, then began the return journey. They retraced their route with the same efficiency. They arrived back at the Bay of Whales on January 25th, 1912, after 99 days on the ice. They had made the round trip of over 1,800 miles. Not a single man had been injured. They had plenty of food remaining. It had been, by any measure, a perfect expedition. A masterclass. In polar travel, Amundsen had won the race. Scott knew nothing of Amundsen's success. His expedition continued to struggle southward, unaware that they were racing for second place. On December 21st, the first support party turned back. On December 31st, the second support party, led by Edward Evans, also turned back. Scott was left with 4 companions for the final push to the pole: Edward Wilson, Henry Bowers, Lawrence Oates, and Edgar Evans. This was a last-minute change to Scott's plan. Originally, he had intended to take only 3 men to the pole, making a party of 4, but he had decided at the last moment to include Bowers. This decision would have fatal consequences, as all their supplies and equipment had been calculated for 4 men, not 5. The final 500 miles to the pole were a nightmare. The surface was terrible, the sledge dragging through soft snow that felt like sand. The men were exhausted. Their food rations were barely sufficient, and they were all showing signs of scurvy and frostbite. Oates's leg was causing him increasing pain. Edgar Evans had suffered a concussion from a fall and was becoming increasingly confused and clumsy. The weather was terrible, with blizzards pinning them in their tent for days. But still, they pushed on, driven by Scott's determination and by their loyalty to him and to each other. They were British naval officers and seamen, and they would not quit. On January 17th, 1912, Scott and his 4 companions reached the South Pole. What should have been a moment of triumph became a moment of crushing despair. There, standing at 90 degrees south, was Amundsen's tent, with the Norwegian flag snapping in the wind. The Norwegians had been there a month earlier. Scott had lost the race, and the realization broke something inside him. He wrote in his diary that night, "The worst has happened. The Norwegians have forestalled us. It is a terrible disappointment, and I am very sorry for my loyal companions. Great God, this is an awful place, and terrible enough for us to have labored to it without the reward of priority." They took photographs at the pole, grim-faced men standing beneath the British flag, looking more like prisoners than explorers. Then they began the 800-mile journey back. The return journey became a descent into hell. The men were already weakened from the journey to the pole, and now they had to retrace their steps with diminishing food supplies. Edgar Evans was the first to collapse. His hands were badly frostbitten, his fingers turning black and useless. He fell repeatedly, hitting his head. On February 17th, at the base of the Beardmore Glacier, Evans collapsed for the last time. He died that night in the tent, the first of Scott's polar party to perish. His death was a terrible blow to morale, but there was no time to properly mourn. The remaining 4 men had to keep moving, or they would all die. By early March, the party was in desperate condition. They were all suffering from scurvy, their gums bleeding, their teeth loose, their joints swollen and painful. Oates's feet were so badly frozen that he could barely walk, and every step was agony. But he forced himself to continue, not wanting to slow down his companions. On the night of March 16th, during a blizzard, Oates made a decision. He knew he was dying, knew he was slowing the others down. He stood up in the tent and spoke words that would become legendary. "I am just going outside and maybe some time." He walked out into the blizzard. Oates had sacrificed himself in hopes that his companions might survive. It was an act of extraordinary courage, but it was also futile. Scott, Wilson, and Bowers struggled on for another 11 days. By March 19th, they were just 11 miles from One Ton Depot, a supply cache. A blizzard struck, pinning them in their tent. They waited for the weather to clear, but it did not. Day after day, the wind howled and the snow fell. They grew weaker. Their fuel ran out, so they could no longer melt snow for water or warm their food. They lay in their sleeping bags, slowly freezing to death. Scott used his last hours to write. He wrote letters to the widows of his dead companions. He wrote letters to his own wife and to his mother. His last diary entry was dated March 29, 1912. "It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. For God's sake, look after our people." Then the writing stopped. Scott, Wilson, and Bowers died in that tent, probably sometime in late March, though the exact date is unknown. Their bodies were found 8 months later by a search party. The tent had been almost completely buried by snow, and the 3 men lay in their sleeping bags, frozen solid, Scott's diary beside him. The news of Scott's death reached England in February 1913, and it caused an outpouring of grief, unprecedented in British history. Scott was lionized as a hero, a martyr who had died in pursuit of glory for his nation. His final letters and diary entries were published and became instant classics. Amundsen, who had actually succeeded, was largely forgotten in Britain or dismissed as someone who had won through trickery and luck. The mythology of Scott's tragic expedition would dominate British culture for generations, overshadowing the fact that Amundsen had accomplished what Scott had attempted. The question that would haunt historians for the next century was simple. Why did Scott fail where Amundsen succeed? The deaths of Scott and his companions marked the end of what historians call the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. But it was not the end of humanity's fascination with the continent. If anything, the tragedy only intensified interest in Antarctica, transforming it into a symbol of human struggle. The next chapter would be written not by men seeking the pole, but by men seeking to cross the entire continent from sea to sea. And the man who would attempt this feat was perhaps the most remarkable polar explorer of all, Ernest Shackleton. Shackleton had watched from England as Amundsen reached the pole and as Scott died trying. He felt a stirring of ambition, the need to return to Antarctica and accomplish something to secure his place in history. The pole was gone, conquered by Amundsen, and Shackleton needed a new goal, something even more audacious. He conceived a plan: land on one side of Antarctica, trek across the continent via the South Pole, and emerge on the opposite coast. It would be a journey of over 1,800 miles across the most hostile environment on Earth. Shackleton called it the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition, and he began raising funds with characteristic energy and optimism. By August 1914, Shackleton had secured financing, purchased the Endurance, and recruited a crew of 27 men. The timing could not have been worse. Europe was descending into World War I, and Britain had more pressing concerns. But Shackleton had commitments, had made promises, and he was not a man to back down. The Endurance departed England in August 1914, sailed to South America, then headed south, toward the Weddell Sea. From there, he would begin the transcontinental crossing. It was a solid plan, well thought out, with supply depots. But in Antarctica, plans are fragile things, easily destroyed by ice and weather and bad luck. The Endurance entered the Weddell Sea in December 1914 and immediately encountered heavy pack ice. This was not unusual. The Weddell Sea is notorious for its ice, which circulates in a massive clockwise But Shackleton had navigated pack ice before, and he was confident the Endurance could push through to the coast. 4 weeks, the ship fought its way south, the crew watching anxiously as ice floes pressed against the hull. They came within 80 miles of their intended landing site, so close that the men could almost taste success. Then, on January 19th, 1915, the ice closed in around the Endurance and would not let go. The ship was trapped, held fast in the frozen grip of the Weddell Sea. At first, no one was particularly worried. Ships had been trapped in ice before and had eventually broken free when the ice loosened in the spring. The crew settled into a routine, conducting scientific observations, exercising on the ice, playing football, caring for the ship's cat and sled dogs. Shackleton kept morale high with his personal magnetism and his refusal to show any sign of worry. But as weeks turned into months and the ice showed no sign of releasing the ship, the men began to understand the gravity of their situation. They were drifting north with the ice, moving further from the Antarctic coast and further from any hope of rescue. The expedition had not even begun, and already it was in jeopardy. Throughout the Antarctic winter of 1915, the Endurance drifted with the ice, a prisoner of forces beyond human control. The crew could hear the ice moving around them, groaning and cracking, enormous pressures building as ice floes collided. The ship would sometimes be lifted by the ice, tilted at crazy angles, her timbers creaking in protest. The men knew what was coming. They had all heard stories of ships being crushed by ice, of wooden hulls splintering. October 27th, 1915. The end came suddenly and with terrible force. The ice pressure increased throughout the day, squeezing the Endurance from all sides. Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. The men salvaged what they could: food, tents, sledges, the 3 lifeboats. They moved everything onto the ice and set up camp, watching helplessly as their ship, their home, was slowly destroyed. The Endurance's back broke first, the deck splitting in two. Then the stern was crushed, the planks exploding outward. On November 21st, the Endurance slipped beneath the ice and disappeared into the dark waters of the Weddell Sea. The expedition was over before it had begun, and now Shackleton faced a new challenge: how to save his men. They were stranded on the ice, hundreds of miles from the nearest land, with 3 small boats, limited supplies, and no hope of rescue. No one knew where they were. No one was coming to save them. Their survival depended entirely on Shackleton's leadership. For 5 months, the crew camped on the ice, drifting north as the pack ice slowly broke up in the Antarctic spring. They lived in tents on the ice, sleeping in wet sleeping bags, eating seal, meat, and penguin, rationing their supplies. The psychological strain was immense. They were living on a moving platform that could break apart at any moment. Finally, in April 1916, the ice had broken up enough that they could launch the boats. Shackleton made a decision. They would sail for Elephant Island, a desolate rock about 100 miles to the north. It was not a rescue, but it was land, solid ground, and after months on the ice, that seemed like paradise. The journey to Elephant Island was a nightmare. The 3 boats were dangerously overloaded, waves constantly washing over them. The men were soaked and freezing, huddled together for warmth, bailing constantly to keep the boats from swamping. They had to navigate through a maze of ice floes and icebergs, any one of which could have smashed their fragile boats to pieces. Some men suffered frostbite so severe that their feet turned black and gangrenous. Others developed saltwater boils. But Shackleton drove them on, cajoling, encouraging, sometimes ordering, whatever it took to keep them moving. On April 15th, 1916, after 7 days at sea, the boats reached Elephant Island. The men staggered ashore, many of them collapsing on the beach, kissing the rocks, weeping with relief. It was the first time they had stood on solid ground in over a year. But Elephant Island was not salvation. If they stayed there, they would eventually die of starvation or exposure. Shackleton knew there was only one option. He had to go for help. The nearest human settlement was on South Georgia Island, over 800 miles away. It would require sailing one of the small boats across the Scotia Sea, through storms and icebergs and waves that could reach 50 feet high. Shackleton chose 5 men to accompany him: Frank Worsley, Tom Crean, Timothy McCarthy, John Vincent, and Harry They took the largest of the 3 boats, the James Caird, a 22-foot open boat that McNish modified. On April 24th, 1916, the James Caird departed Elephant Island, leaving behind 22 men. The voyage of the James Caird is considered one of the greatest boat journeys in history. For 17 days, Shackleton and his 5 companions battled across the Scotia Sea in conditions that would terrify experienced sailors. They navigated by the stars when they could see them, and by dead reckoning when they could not. Worsley performed calculations with frozen fingers while being thrown around, and somehow he got them within sight of South Georgia Island. But reaching South Georgia was not the same as being rescued. They landed on the wrong side of the island. The island was mountainous, its interior an unexplored wilderness of glaciers and peaks. No one had ever crossed it. Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean left the other 3 men with the boat and set off to cross the island on foot. They had a carpenter's adze for an ice axe, screws driven through their boots for traction, and 50 feet of rope. That was all. For 36 hours they marched across glaciers and over mountains, without sleeping, knowing that if they stopped, they would freeze to death. They descended snow slopes by sitting down and sliding thousands of feet in uncontrolled glissades that could have killed them. On May 20th, 1916, they walked into Stromness whaling station. 3 filthy, emaciated, bearded men. The whalers did not recognize them at first, could not believe these walking skeletons were the crew of an Antarctic expedition. Shackleton immediately organized a rescue mission to retrieve the 3 men left on the other side of South Georgia Island. But rescuing the men on Elephant Island proved far more difficult. The sea ice around the island was so thick that ships could not reach it. Shackleton tried 3 times, in 3 different ships, to reach Elephant Island, and 3 times he was turned back by ice. It was agonizing, knowing his men were stranded just miles away but unreachable. Finally, on August 30th, 1916, in a small Chilean tug called the Elcho, Shackleton managed to reach Elephant Island. He could see figures on the beach, and he counted them frantically. 22 men. All of them were alive. It was one of the greatest rescue stories in history. Shackleton's achievement in bringing all his men home alive became legendary. But there was another part of his trans-Antarctic expedition that is often forgotten. A tragedy unfolded on the opposite side of the continent while Shackleton was fighting for survival. In the Weddell Sea, the Ross Sea Party had been tasked with laying supply depots across the Ross Ice Shelf for Shackleton's planned crossing of Antarctica. These men would save food and fuel at predetermined locations so that when Shackleton arrived, he would have supplies waiting for him. But Shackleton never came, because the Endurance was crushed before he could begin his journey. The Ross Sea Party did not know this. They carried out their mission with devastating consequences. The Ross Sea Party, led by Aeneas McIntosh, arrived at McMurdo Sound in January 1915 aboard the ship Aurora. They established a base at Cape Evans, in the same hut that Scott's expedition had used 5 years earlier. The plan was straightforward. They would spend the winter preparing. Then in the spring they would haul supplies south across the Ross Ice Shelf, establishing a series of depots that would stretch all the way to the Beardmore Glacier. It was back-breaking work, men hauling sledges across hundreds of miles of ice, but it was essential to Shackleton's plan. What the Ross Sea Party did not know was that their situation was about to become catastrophic. In May 1915, during the depths of the Antarctic winter, a massive storm struck McMurdo Sound. The Aurora, which had been anchored in the bay, was torn from its moorings by the wind and ice and blown out to sea. The ship, with 10 men still aboard, drifted north with the pack ice. Unable to return to Cape Evans, the men ashore watched helplessly as their ship disappeared over the horizon, taking with it most of their supplies, their warm clothing, and their only means of escape from Antarctica. McIntosh and his 9 companions were stranded with minimal food, inadequate clothing, and no prospect of rescue. They were in the same hut where Scott and his men had lived, surrounded by the remnants of that earlier expedition. A constant reminder of how Antarctic stories can end in tragedy. Despite their desperate situation, McIntosh made a decision that speaks to both his courage and perhaps his foolishness. They would complete their mission. Shackleton was counting on them, even though they had no way of knowing that Shackleton would never arrive. They would lay the supply depots as planned, because that was their duty. So in the spring of 1915, using equipment salvaged from Scott's old expedition and clothing made from whatever materials they could scavenge, McIntosh led his men south across the Ross Ice Shelf. They were essentially refugees, marching across Antarctica in boots that were falling apart, pulling sledges with worn runners, eating minimal rations because they had to conserve what little food remained. The depalaying journey of 1915 to 1916 was a nightmare of deprivation and suffering. The men were inadequately clothed, constantly cold, suffering from frostbite and scurvy. They were pulling massive loads across terrible surfaces, sometimes making only a few miles per day through soft snow and wind-carved ridges of ice that made every step an ordeal. Several men collapsed from exhaustion and had to be hauled on the sledges. But they pressed on, driven by McIntosh's determination and by their sense of duty to Shackleton. They laid depots at Mount Hope, at the foot of the Beardmore Glacier, over 360 miles from their base. Then they turned around and began the long march back. The return journey broke them. The men were starving. Their clothes were in tatters. Their bodies were failing. Arnold Spencer Smith, the expedition's chaplain, who had volunteered for the depalaying party despite having no polar experience, collapsed and could not continue. For weeks, his companions dragged him on a sledge, hoping he would recover, but he grew steadily weaker. On March 9th, 1916, Spencer Smith died. They buried him in the ice, marked the spot with a simple cross made from sledge runners, and continued north. They had no choice. If they stayed too properly mourn, they would all die. By the time the survivors reached Hut Point in mid-March, they were barely alive. They had been on the ice for over 4 months, had traveled more than 1,500 miles, and had accomplished their mission, but at a terrible cost. Victor Hayward was so weakened by scurvy that he could barely walk. McIntosh himself was suffering from snow blindness and scurvy, but they were back at Hut Point, and they had food there, supplies left from earlier journeys. They would rest, recover, and then make the final 20-mile journey across the sea ice to Cape Evans, where the main hut offered better shelter and more supplies. In early May, McIntosh grew impatient. He could see Cape Evans across the sea ice of McMurdo Sound, could see the hut where comfort and safety waited. The sea ice looked solid, had been frozen all winter. He decided he and Hayward would cross it immediately, rather than waiting for better conditions. It was a fatal mistake. Ernest Joyce, the most experienced man in the party, begged McIntosh not to go, told him the ice was unreliable, that they should wait. But McIntosh was the leader, and he made the decision to go. On May 8, 1916, McIntosh and Hayward set out across the sea ice. They were never seen again. The ice must have broken beneath them, plunging them into water so cold that they would have died in minutes. Their bodies were never recovered. The survivors, 5 men including Joyce, waited at Hut Point for the sea ice to solidify, then crossed safely to Cape Evans in July. They found the hut in good condition and settled in to wait for the Aurora to return. Though they had no idea if the ship had survived, or if rescue would ever come, they lived off seal meat and penguin, rationed the meager supplies that remained, and tried to maintain their sanity through the long Antarctic winter. They did not know that Shackleton was at that very moment sailing the James Caird across the Scotia Sea, fighting his own battle for survival. They did not know that World War I was raging in Europe, that millions of men were dying in trenches in France and Belgium. They were isolated, cut off from the world, uncertain if anyone even knew they existed. The Aurora, meanwhile, had survived its ordeal. After being blown north from McMurdo Sound, the ship had drifted in the pack ice for 10 months before breaking free in March 1916. The crew sailed the damaged vessel to New Zealand, arriving in April, and immediately organized a rescue mission. But rescuing the Ross Sea Party proved as difficult as rescuing Shackleton's men on Elephant Island. It was not until January 10th, 1917, that a ship finally reached Cape Evans and found the survivors. By then, they had been stranded in Antarctica for 2 years. Of the 10 men left ashore when the Aurora was blown out to sea, only 7 survived. 3 had died. Spencer Smith during the depolaying journey, and McIntosh and Hayward lost on the sea ice. These men died, completing a mission that turned out to be unnecessary, laying depots for a crossing that never happened. Their sacrifice was largely forgotten in the celebrations surrounding Shackleton's more dramatic rescue. Even today, few people know the story of the Ross Sea Party, how they persevered in the face of impossible odds, how they died doing their duty. Their story is a reminder that Antarctic history is filled not just with famous explorers, but with countless men who worked behind the scenes, who suffered and sometimes died in support of someone else's dream of glory. The heroic age of Antarctic exploration ended with World War I. The war had consumed the attention and resources of the nations that had been competing for Antarctic glory. Men who might have been exploring the South Pole were instead dying in the mud of Flanders. The priorities of nations shifted from geographical discovery to survival and victory. When the war finally ended in 1918, the world was exhausted, traumatized, changed forever. The old certainties were gone, the old glories tarnished. The idea of men dying in pursuit of geographical records seemed quaint, even foolish, in a world that had just witnessed industrial slaughter on an unprecedented scale. But Antarctica itself remained unchanged by human conflict, indifferent to human suffering. The continent continued its ancient rhythms, the ice advancing and retreating with the seasons, the winds howling across empty plateaus, the penguins and seals living their lives in the coastal regions, where a few degrees of temperature made the difference between life and death. The interior remained largely unexplored, a vast white mystery. The expeditions of the heroic age had revealed the outline of the continent, had reached the pole, had mapped the major features of the coastline, but huge gaps remained in humanity's knowledge. Vast regions had never been visited by human beings. The thickness of the ice sheet was unknown. Whether Antarctica was one continent or several islands covered by a single ice sheet remained unclear. The true size and shape of the continent were still matters of speculation. The 1920s and 30s saw a new phase of Antarctic exploration, characterized by technological innovation rather than heroic suffering. Airplanes revolutionized polar exploration, allowing men to cover in hours distances that had taken earlier explorers months to traverse. Richard Byrd, an American naval officer and aviator, would become the dominant figure in this new era of Antarctic exploration. Byrd understood that the age of dog sledges and man-hauling was over, that the future of polar exploration lay with machines, airplanes, radio communications, tracked vehicles. He organized expeditions that were less about personal courage and more about technological capability, bringing an American industrial might to bear on the Antarctic frontier. In November 1929, Byrd became the first person to fly over the South Pole, covering in 18 hours a journey that had taken Amundsen months and had killed Scott. The flight was not without danger. The four trimotor aircraft struggled to gain altitude in the thin air, barely clearing the mountains, and the crew had to throw equipment overboard to lighten the load, but they succeeded. And aerial photography from this and subsequent flights began filling in the blank spaces on Antarctic maps. Byrd would return to Antarctica again and again over the next 3 decades, establishing permanent bases, conducting scientific research, and claiming vast territories for the United States. His expeditions marked the beginning of Antarctica's transformation from a testing ground for heroes to a laboratory for scientists. Other nations were not idle. The British, Norwegians, Germans, Australians, and others continued to mount expeditions, each claiming territory, each planting flags, each asserting sovereignty over pieces of the frozen continent. By the 1930s, 7 nations setting up potential conflicts. It was becoming clear that Antarctica needed some kind of international framework to prevent disputes from escalating into something more serious. But that framework would have to wait. Another world war was coming, and once again, Antarctica would be forgotten as humanity turned its attention to more pressing matters of survival and conquest. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're journeying to the coldest, driest, and most remote continent on Earth, Antarctica. But we're not just here for the penguins and icebergs. We're diving into its fascinating and surprisingly tense history right after World War II. So, the war is over. The world is trying to rebuild, but a new kind of tension is brewing, the Cold War. And believe it or not, this icy standoff found its way to the literal iciest place on the planet. Why? Because Antarctica was suddenly looking very, very valuable. In the late 1940s, countries started getting grabby. Argentina and Chile, being the closest neighbors, had long-standing claims. The UK, Australia, New Zealand, France, and Norway had also staked their flags based on exploration. But after the war, things heated up. The United States, fresh off its victory, launched the largest Antarctic expedition ever, Operation Hyde. Officially, it was for training and scientific research. Unofficially, many saw it as America flexing its muscles and scouting for potential military bases and resources. And they weren't alone. The Soviet Union, always eager to counter the US, also began sending its own expeditions. Imagine this. In the vast, silent expanse of ice, you have American and Soviet teams, sometimes just miles apart, watching each other, gathering intelligence, and trying to one-up each other in scientific discoveries. It was a polar chess game. This created a huge problem. Multiple countries claimed the same overlapping slices of the continent. Argentina, Chile, and the UK were practically in a 3-way tug-of war over the Antarctic Peninsula. There were even a few tense moments where shots were fired, not between armies, but between rival expeditions. It became clear that if something wasn't done, Antarctica could become the next global flashpoint. Then came a breakthrough idea, a moment of pure scientific idealism. In 1957 and 1958, the world celebrated the International Geophysical Year, or IGY. This was a massive, coordinated global effort to study the Earth and its cosmic environment. Scientists from 67 countries participated, putting aside political differences for the sake of knowledge, and the star of the IGY, Antarctica. 12 nations, including the big Cold War players, the US and the Soviet Union, agreed to build and staff over 50 research stations across the continent. For 18 months, they worked together, shared data, and focused purely on science. They studied everything from the ice sheet stepped to the strange auroras dancing in the polar sky. The IGY was a stunning success. It proved that international cooperation in Antarctica was not just possible, but incredibly productive. The discoveries made during this period laid the foundation for much of what we know about our planet's climate and geology today. Riding this wave of goodwill, President Eisenhower of the United States saw an opportunity. He invited the 11 other nations active in Antarctica during the IGY to a conference in Washington, D.C. The goal to create a treaty that would preserve the continent for peace and science forever. The negotiations weren't easy. There were deep disagreements. The countries with territorial claims didn't want to give them up. The countries without claims, like the US and the USSR, didn't want to recognize anyone else's. And what about military activity or nuclear testing? After weeks of intense talks, they reached a brilliant compromise. The Antarctic Treaty was signed on December 1st, 1959. And it's a masterpiece of diplomacy. Here's the genius of it. The treaty doesn't solve the territorial claims, it just freezes them. It states that while the treaty is in force, no new claims can be made, and existing claims are put on hold. It's like hitting a giant pause button on all the political squabbles. The treaty's core principles are simple and powerful. First, Antarctica shall be used for peaceful purposes only. All military bases, fortifications, and weapons testing are banned. This made Antarctica the world's first non-militarized continent. Second, freedom of scientific investigation and cooperation will continue. All research stations are open to inspection by any other treaty nation at any time. This transparency ensures no one is doing anything they shouldn't be. Think about how radical that was in the middle of the Cold War. Americans inspecting Soviet bases and vice versa. The Antarctic Treaty was a landmark achievement. It set aside an entire continent, 1/10 of the Earth's landmass, as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. It was a beacon of hope in a deeply divided world. But the story doesn't end there. The treaty was just the foundation. Over the following decades, the Antarctic Treaty System grew, adding new layers of protection. In the 1970s and 80s, a new debate flared up: resources. Geologists suspected that Antarctica might hold vast reserves of oil, gas, and minerals. Some countries, facing energy crises, were eager to start prospecting. This created a huge dilemma. Would the continent of science become a continent of mining? Conservation groups and many nations pushed back hard. They argued that exploiting Antarctica's resources would be an environmental disaster, threatening its fragile ecosystem and undermining the spirit of the treaty. For years, the debate raged. Finally, in 1991, another historic agreement was reached: the Madrid Protocol on Environmental Protection. This protocol is incredibly important. It designates Antarctica as a natural reserve, devoted to peace and science, and most crucially, it bans all mineral resource activities, except for scientific research. This ban is not temporary, it's indefinite. The Madrid Protocol essentially put an end to the dream of mining Antarctica, shifting the focus entirely to environmental protection and scientific study. It set strict rules for everything from waste disposal to preventing the introduction of non-native species. An activity from building a new research station to a tourist visit has to undergo a rigorous environmental impact assessment. Today, the Antarctic Treaty System is a model of international governance. Over 50 nations are now parties to the treaty. They meet annually to manage the continent's affairs, making decisions by consensus. It's a system built on trust, transparency, and a shared commitment to protecting this unique place. So, what started as a post-war scramble for territory and strategic advantage has evolved into one of humanity's greatest success stories of international cooperation. A continent, one-eyed for its military potential, is now a global park, a laboratory for understanding our planet, and a powerful symbol of what we can achieve when we choose peace and science over conflict. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, we can find common ground and work together for the greater good. Antarctica is more than just ice and snow. It's a legacy of peace that we must continue to protect for all future generations. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey to the South Pole interesting, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into fascinating history. See you in the next video. But the treaty did not end human activity in Antarctica. It simply channeled that activity into scientific research. The decades following the treaty's ratification saw an explosion of Antarctic science. Permanent research stations were established by numerous nations, ranging from small summer camps to year-round bases capable of supporting dozens of scientists and support personnel. These stations became platforms for research into glaciology, climatology, biology, astronomy, and numerous other fields. Antarctica's isolation, its pristine environment, its extreme conditions, all made it an ideal natural laboratory for studying phenomena that could not be easily observed elsewhere. One of the most significant scientific achievements of this era was the discovery of the ozone hole above Antarctica. In 1985, British scientists working at Halley Research Station discovered that ozone levels in the stratosphere above Antarctica were dropping dramatically each spring, creating a hole in the ozone layer that protected Earth from harmful ultraviolet radiation. This discovery shocked the world and led directly to the Montreal Protocol, an international agreement to phase out the production of chlorofluorocarbons and other ozone-depleting substances. The ozone hole was proof that human activities could have planet-wide effects, that pollution produced in industrialized nations could impact even the most remote and pristine environments on Earth. It was a wake-up call that helped catalyze the modern environmental movement. Antarctic ice cores provided another revolutionary contribution to science. Beginning in the 1960s and continuing to the present day, scientists have drilled deep into the Antarctic ice sheet, extracting cylindrical cores of ice that contain trapped air bubbles and other materials. These ice cores are time machines, containing atmospheric samples from thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years ago. By analyzing the composition of these air bubbles, scientists have reconstructed Earth's climate history with unprecedented precision. The ice cores revealed that Earth's climate has oscillated between ice ages and warmer interglacial periods and regular cycles, that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have varied dramatically over time, and most importantly, that current carbon dioxide levels are higher than at any point in at least 800,000 years. This data has been fundamental to understanding climate change and has provided some of the most compelling evidence that human activities are altering the global climate. The logistical challenges of Antarctic research are immense. Every piece of equipment, every bit of food, every drop of fuel must be transported thousands of miles across the Southern Ocean, often through pack ice and storms that would terrify sailors anywhere else on Earth. Most stations can only be resupplied during the brief Antarctic summer, when the sea ice retreats enough to allow ships to reach the coast. Stations located in the interior, like the American Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station or the Russian Vostok Station, must be supplied entirely by aircraft, a tremendously expensive and dangerous operation. Personnel at these interior stations are completely isolated during the winter months, unable to leave even in case of medical emergency because the extreme cold makes aircraft operations impossible. Winter-over crews at these stations face many of the same psychological challenges that the explorers of the heroic age faced: isolation, darkness, extreme cold, and the knowledge that if something goes wrong, rescue is not coming. Modern technology has made Antarctic operations safer and more efficient, but it has not eliminated the dangers. Aircraft still crash in whiteout conditions. Ships still get trapped in ice. Personnel still suffer frostbite and other cold-related injuries. In 1979, an Air New Zealand flight carrying tourists crashed into Mount Erebus, killing all 257 people aboard in Antarctica's worst disaster. The cause was determined to be a navigation error compounded by poor visibility, a reminder that even with modern technology, Antarctica remains unforgiving of mistakes. There have been numerous other incidents over the decades: fires at research stations that killed personnel who could not escape or be rescued, crashes of aircraft and helicopters, deaths from exposure when individuals became lost in blizzards just yards from their stations. The environmental impact of human activity in Antarctica has become a growing concern. Some historic sites, like Scott's Hut at Cape Evans or Shackleton's Hut at Cape Royds, are now protected as heritage sites, but they are surrounded by the detritus of early 20th century expeditions. Modern research stations generate significant amounts of waste, including sewage, fuel residue, and scientific equipment. Under the Environmental Protocol to the Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1991, all wastes must now be removed from Antarctica, rather than being buried or dumped. But this is an expensive and logistically challenging requirement. The protocol also established protected areas and restricted access to certain sensitive environments, attempting to balance scientific research with environmental conservation. Tourism has emerged as another significant human activity in Antarctica, beginning in the 1960s with small-scale expeditions and growing dramatically in recent decades. Antarctic tourism now brings tens of thousands of visitors to the continent, each year mostly via cruise ships that visit the Antarctic Peninsula and the subantarctic islands. These tourists pay substantial sums for the privilege of seeing penguins and icebergs. of standing on the seventh continent, of experiencing a small taste of the environment that challenged and sometimes killed the great explorers. Tourism is regulated under the Antarctic Treaty System, with strict rules about where ships can go, how many people can land at any one time, and how close they can approach wildlife. But the sheer number of visitors is raising concerns about cumulative environmental impact, about whether Antarctica can sustain this level of human traffic without suffering degradation of its fragile ecosystems. Have you ever wondered what secrets lie buried under miles of ice at the bottom of the world? Antarctica isn't just a vast, frozen desert. It's a critical scientific laboratory that holds the key to understanding our planet's past, present, and future. Today, we're re-venturing into the heart of this icy continent to uncover why it is so important for all of us. So, why do scientists from all over the globe brave the harshest conditions on Earth to study this place? Because Antarctica is essentially a time capsule. The ice here, especially in the East Antarctic ice sheet, is over 1 million years old. As snow fell and compacted over millennia, it trapped tiny bubbles of air. By drilling deep ice cores, scientists can analyze this ancient air and reconstruct Earth's climate history with incredible precision. These ice cores tell us about past atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, temperatures, and major climate events. It's like reading a history book of our planet's climate, which is crucial for understanding the changes we're seeing today. But Antarctica's importance goes far beyond its ice cores. The continent and its surrounding Southern Ocean play a massive role in regulating the global climate system. Think of Antarctica as Earth's giant air conditioner. Its bright white ice sheets reflect a huge amount of solar radiation back into space, a process known as the albedo effect. This helps to cool the entire planet. If this ice melts, the darker ocean or land underneath absorbs more heat, creating a feedback loop that accelerates warming. It's a delicate balance, and Antarctica is at the center of it. The Southern Ocean is also a powerhouse for global ocean circulation. As seawater near Antarctica gets very cold and salty, it becomes dense and sinks to the ocean floor. This process is called Antarctic bottom water formation, drives the global ocean conveyor belt. This massive current system transports heat, salt, and nutrients all around the world, influencing weather patterns from Europe to North America. Without this polar engine, our global climate would be drastically different. It also absorbs a significant amount of the excess heat and carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere, acting as a buffer against even more rapid climate change. Now let's talk about something that affects coastlines worldwide: sea level rise. The Antarctic ice sheet holds about 90% of the world's ice, and if it were to melt completely, globally sea levels would rise by a catastrophic 60 meters, or nearly 200 feet. Of course, that's an extreme scenario, but even partial melting has serious consequences. Scientists are particularly concerned about the West Antarctic ice sheet, which is showing signs of instability. Its glaciers are melting faster than we previously thought, contributing significantly to the sea level rise we're already experiencing. Understanding the dynamics of these ice sheets is one of the most urgent challenges in climate science today. Beyond climate, Antarctica is a unique haven for life. The extreme cold, dryness, and isolation make it a proxy for conditions on other planets, like Mars. NASA and other space agencies test rovers and life detection equipment here, preparing for future missions into our solar system. The organisms that survive here, known as extremophiles, are fascinating in their own right. They have unique adaptations that could have applications in medicine and biotechnology. For example, some bacteria produce a natural antifreeze that could be used to preserve organs for transplantation. The Southern Ocean surrounding Antarctica is also one of the most productive marine ecosystems on the planet, all thanks to a tiny creature, krill. These small crustaceans are the foundation of the entire food web. They feed on phytoplankton and are, in turn, eaten by penguins, seals, whales, and fish. The health of the krill population is a direct indicator of the health of the entire Antarctic ecosystem. However, ocean warming and acidification are threatening these vital creatures, putting everything that depends on them at risk. Because of its unparalleled scientific value and pristine environment, Antarctica is protected by the Antarctic Treaty. Signed in 1959, this international agreement sets the continent aside as a place for peace and science. It prohibits military activity, nuclear explosions, and mineral extraction, ensuring that this unique wilderness is preserved for research. This treaty is a remarkable example of international cooperation, a model for how we can work together to protect shared global resources. So, what can we do? The fate of Antarctica is directly linked to our actions, no matter where we live. Reducing our carbon footprint by using less energy, embracing renewable sources, and making sustainable choices helps to slow the warming that threatens its ice. Supporting policies and leaders who take climate change seriously is also crucial. The future of Antarctica isn't just about preserving a remote, icy landscape. It's about safeguarding the stability of our planet's climate, protecting our coastlines, and preserving the delicate balance of life on Earth. This frozen continent at the end of the world is more connected to our daily lives than we might think, and its future is truly in our hands. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey to the South Pole interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the wonders of our planet. See you next time. The biological research conducted in Antarctica has yielded remarkable discoveries. The Southern Ocean surrounding Antarctica is one of the most productive ecosystems on Earth, despite the extreme cold. The base of the food chain is phytoplankton, microscopic plants that bloom in the ocean during the Antarctic summer when sunlight is available 24 hours a day. These phytoplankton are eaten by krill, small shrimp-like crustaceans that swim in massive swarms, sometimes millions of individuals in a single cubic meter of water. Krill are the keystone species of the Antarctic ecosystem, consumed by whales, seals, penguins, and fish. The total biomass of Antarctic krill may be one of the largest of any animal species on Earth, with estimates ranging up to 500 million tons. Climate change is affecting krill populations, as warming waters and declining sea ice alter their habitat. Since krill feed on algae that grow under sea ice, less sea ice means less food for krill, which means less food for everything that eats krill. The whales that feed in Antarctic waters are among the largest animals ever to have lived on Earth. Blue whales, fin whales, humpback whales, and several other species migrate to Antarctica each summer to gorge on the abundant krill. These whales were nearly hunted to extinction in the 20th century, with industrial whaling operations killing hundreds of thousands of whales in Antarctic waters between 1900 and 1960. The Antarctic blue whale population, which may have numbered over 200,000 before whaling began, was reduced to just a few hundred individuals. Commercial whaling in Antarctica finally ended in the 1980s, though Japan continued so-called scientific whaling until recently, a transparent cover for commercial operations. Whale populations are slowly recovering, but most species are still far below their historical numbers. Penguins are perhaps the most iconic Antarctic animals, and several species breed on the Antarctic continent or nearby islands. Emperor penguins, the largest penguin species, are remarkable for their breeding strategy. They breed during the Antarctic winter, the only warm-blooded animal to do so. Males incubate the eggs on their feet, huddled together in massive groups called huddles, enduring months of darkness and temperatures below -60 degrees Fahrenheit, while the females are at sea feeding. When the chicks hatch, the females return, having navigated across miles of sea ice to find their mates among thousands of identical-looking penguins. Emperor penguins are highly adapted to sea ice, and climate change, which is reducing sea ice extent and stability, poses a significant threat to their survival. Several emperor penguin colonies have experienced catastrophic breeding failures in recent years, when unseasonably early sea breakup has caused chicks to drown before they were old enough to swim. The human element of Antarctic research has evolved dramatically from the days of Scott and Shackleton, but it remains challenging. Modern researchers at Antarctic stations live in relative comfort compared to the explorers of the heroic age, with heated buildings, regular meals, internet access, and recreational facilities. But they still face isolation, confinement, and extreme environmental conditions. Winter over crews at South Pole Station or other isolated bases spend months in complete darkness, with temperatures that make it dangerous to spend more than a few minutes outside. The psychological effects of this isolation are significant. People become irritable, depressed, sometimes paranoid. There is a phenomenon known as Big I, where isolation and stress lead to insomnia and psychological distress. Antarctic programs carefully screen candidates for winter-over positions, looking for individuals who can handle months of confinement with a small group of people. But problems still arise. Medical emergencies in Antarctica can be life-threatening. Not because of the injury or illness itself, but because of the impossibility of evacuation during winter. There have been several dramatic cases of doctors at Antarctic stations who had to perform surgery on themselves or on colleagues with minimal equipment and no possibility of outside help. In 1999, Dr. Jerry Nielsen, a physician winter-overing at the South Pole, discovered she had breast cancer. Chemotherapy drugs were airdropped to the station in the middle of winter, a dangerous operation in extreme cold and darkness, and she administered treatment to herself with the help of non-medical personnel. She survived long enough for a daring midwinter rescue flight to evacuate her when conditions improved slightly. Her story highlighted the extreme isolation of Antarctic research and the courage required of those who work there. The future of Antarctica is uncertain. Climate models predict continued warming, which will likely lead to further melting of ice sheets and ice shelves. Some scientists predict that within decades, parts of Antarctica that are currently frozen year-round may experience summer melting, fundamentally changing the character of the continent. The Antarctic Peninsula, already the warmest part of Antarctica, may lose most of its ice within this century. The fate of the major ice sheets is less certain but potentially catastrophic, even in optimistic scenarios where humanity rapidly reduces carbon emissions. Some degree of ice sheet loss appears inevitable, committing the world to sea level rise that will continue for centuries. At the same time, there is increasing interest in Antarctic resources. The continent is believed to hold significant deposits of minerals and potentially oil and gas, though the environmental protocol to the Antarctic Treaty currently bans mining and resource extraction. This ban is up for review in 2048, and there are already questions about whether it will be renewed. As resources become scarcer globally, and as technology makes extraction in extreme environments more feasible, the pressure to exploit Antarctic resources may increase. The old territorial claims, frozen under the Antarctic Treaty, may resurface. Nations that feel excluded from Antarctic governance may challenge the existing treaty system. The unique international cooperation that has characterized Antarctica for over 60 years is not guaranteed to continue, yet there is a reason for hope. The Antarctic Treaty has survived longer than most observers predicted. The scientific cooperation it has fostered has produced extraordinary advances in our understanding of Earth systems. Climate change and Antarctica has become a symbol of international cooperation, a demonstration that nations can work together to protect a shared resource for the benefit of all humanity. The challenge now is to maintain that cooperation in the face of climate change, resource scarcity, and geopolitical tensions. The decisions made in the coming decades about Antarctica will affect not just the continent itself, but the entire planet. Antarctica's ice sheets regulate global climate and sea level. Its ecosystems are interconnected with ocean systems worldwide. What happens in Antarctica does not stay in Antarctica. Imagine a land of ice, a continent of extremes, the last true wilderness on our planet. This is Antarctica, a place that has called to the boldest adventurers and the brightest minds for centuries. Today, we're journeying to the bottom of the world to uncover the incredible story of Antarctic exploration. From the first daring voyages into the unknown to the cutting-edge science happening there right now. A Russian expedition led by Fabian Gottlieb, von Bellingshausen, and Mikhail Lazarev is now credited with this historic first sighting, piercing the veil of mystery that had shrouded the South Pole for millennia. With the continent finally confirmed, the so-called heroic age of Antarctic exploration began. This was an era defined by unimaginable hardship, incredible bravery, and a fierce international race for glory. Men with iron wills and wooden ships sailed into the planet's harshest environment, driven by the desire to be the first to reach the geographic South Pole. Two names dominate this chapter: Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian strategist, and Robert Fulton, Scott, the British naval officer. It was a dramatic race to the finish line. Amundsen, meticulous and experienced in polar conditions, planned his expedition with ruthless efficiency. He relied on dog sleds, a technique he'd learned from Inuit peoples, which proved to be perfectly suited for the terrain. His team moved quickly and decisively. Scott, on the other hand, placed his faith in a mix of transport methods, including motorized sledges that quickly failed in the extreme cold, and ponies that couldn't cope with the conditions. Ultimately, his team was forced to man-haul their heavy sleds across the vast, frozen plateau. On December 14, 1911, Roald Amundsen and his 4 companions reached the South Pole, planting the Norwegian flag in a victory born of brilliant planning and respect for the polar environment. Just over a month later, A heartbroken Captain Scott and his party arrived to find they had been beaten. Their return journey became a desperate struggle for survival against starvation and exposure. Tragically, they never made it back. Scott's final diary entries, found with his body months later, are a haunting testament to human endurance and the brutal reality of the Antarctic. But the heroic age wasn't just about the race to the pole. Another legendary figure, Sir Ernest Shackleton, etched his name into history, not through victory, but through survival. His ship, the Endurance, was trapped and crushed by pack ice in the Weddell Sea, leaving him and his 27 men stranded on the frozen ocean. What followed is one of the greatest survival stories ever told. Shackleton led his men across the treacherous, shifting ice to open water, then sailed a small, open lifeboat across 800 miles of the world's stormiest seas to the island of South Georgia. He then trekked across its uncharted, mountainous interior to find help. Incredibly, after nearly 2 years, he returned and rescued every single one of his men. His leadership and unwavering optimism in the face of impossible odds have become legendary. The end of the heroic age marked a shift. The focus moved from geographic firsts to scientific discovery. The International Geophysical Year in 1957 was a major turning point. This global scientific collaboration led to the establishment of dozens of permanent research stations across the continent. It also paved the way for the Antarctic Treaty of 1959. This landmark agreement set aside the entire continent for peaceful scientific pursuits, banning military activity and freezing all territorial claims. It enshrined Antarctica as a natural reserve, a continent for science, managed by international cooperation. Today, Antarctica is a bustling hub of modern science. Thousands of scientists from around the world live and work there, primarily during the austral summer. They're studying everything from climate change to cosmology. The ice itself is a time capsule. By drilling deep ice cores, scientists can analyze trapped air bubbles from hundreds of thousands of years ago, giving us an unprecedented look at Earth's past climate and the history of our atmosphere. This data is absolutely crucial for understanding and modeling future climate change. Antarctica is also one of the best places on Earth to find meteorites. The dry, cold conditions preserve them perfectly, and the movement of the ice sheets concentrates them in certain areas, making them easier to spot against the white backdrop. Some of these space rocks have even come from Mars and the Moon. And high on the polar plateau, the clear, dry, stable air provides the perfect window to the cosmos. Telescopes like the South Pole Telescope are peering into the faint afterglow of the Big Bang, helping us unlock the secrets of the universe's origins. Biologists, meanwhile, are fascinated by the unique life that has adapted to survive here, from the microscopic tardigrades that can withstand freezing and dehydration, to the massive colonies of emperor penguins that breed during the harsh Antarctic winter. The southern ocean surrounding the continent is a rich ecosystem, home to whales, seals, and vast swarms of krill, which form the foundation of the entire food web. Protecting this fragile ecosystem from threats like overfishing and ocean warming is a major priority for the international community. Modern exploration is very different from the days of Scott and Shackleton. Technology has transformed life on the ice. We have specialized tracked vehicles to cross the vast distances, ski-equipped aircraft to reach remote locations, and state-of-the-art research stations that are like small self-sufficient towns. GPS has replaced a sextant, and satellite phones provide instant communication with the outside world. Yet, despite all our technology, Antarctica remains a formidable and dangerous place. The weather can change in an instant, and temperatures can plummet to unimaginable lows. The spirit of adventure, that same drive that pushed the heroes of the past, still lives on. It lives in the scientists who brave the cold to collect their data, the pilots who fly in challenging conditions, and the support staff who keep the stations running. They are the modern-day explorers, continuing the legacy of discovery on the world's last great frontier, from a mythical land on ancient maps to a global laboratory for the future of our planet. The story of Antarctica is a powerful saga of human curiosity, courage, and cooperation. It reminds us that there are still parts of our world that command our respect and inspire our wonder. The journey to understand this frozen continent is far from over, and the discoveries yet to be made will undoubtedly shape our future. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey to the ice. If you enjoyed this exploration, be sure to hit that like button. Subscribe for more adventures, And let me know in the comments what part of Antarctica's story fascinates you the most. See you next time. Have you ever wondered what it takes to live and work in the most extreme place on Earth? Welcome to Antarctica, a continent of ice, silence, and secrets. But beneath this pristine white landscape lies a complex world of human endeavor. A massive logistical operation that makes life here possible. And it's all in the name of science. Science that could determine the future of our planet. Today, we're going behind the scenes to explore the incredible challenges of supporting research in Antarctica, the growing environmental concerns, and the groundbreaking discoveries being made about our changing climate. This is the story of the unsung heroes and the vital work happening at the bottom of the world. To understand Antarctica, you first need to understand the sheer scale of the challenge. Everything, and I mean everything, that people need to survive must be brought in. We're talking food, fuel, building materials, scientific equipment, and even the people themselves. This is the domain of logistics, a year-round battle against the elements. T-mine hubs like McMurdo Station, the largest research base on the continent, are essentially small, self-sufficient towns. During the summer, the population can swell to over 1,000 people. But when the winter sun sets for the last time, a skeleton crew of a few hundred remains, completely isolated for months on end. The lifeline to these remote outposts is a fleet of specialized icebreakers and cargo planes. Ships like the RV Nathaniel B. Palmer have to smash through meters of thick sea ice just to reach the coastline. It's a slow, arduous journey that can take weeks. Once they arrive, a frantic period of offloading begins. Cranes work around the clock, moving shipping containers filled with a year's worth of supplies. Every single item is tracked and accounted for, because a missing crate of essential parts could jeopardize an entire scientific mission. For inland stations, like the Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station, the challenge is even greater. Heavy lift aircraft like the LC-130 Hercules, fitted with skis, are the only way in or out. These pilots are some of the best in the world, landing on runways of compacted snow in conditions that would ground flights anywhere else. Life here is ruled by the weather. A sudden blizzard known as a Condition 1 can bring all outdoor activity to a halt in an instant, with visibility dropping to zero and wind chills plummeting to unimaginable lows. Planning is everything. A single mistake, a forgotten tool, can be fixed with a quick trip to the store. The nearest store is thousands of kilometers away. The people who make this all happen, the mechanics, the cooks, the electricians, the pilots are the true unsung heroes of Antarctic science. They maintain the machines, keep everyone fed and warm, and ensure the researchers can focus on their critical work, all while living in one of the harshest environments imaginable. But bringing all of this to a pristine continent comes with a heavy responsibility. For decades, the Antarctic Treaty has designated this land as a natural reserve, devoted to peace and science. Protecting this fragile ecosystem is paramount. Every single piece of waste generated, from food scraps to broken equipment, must be sorted, packaged, and shipped back out. Nothing is left behind. This pack it out philosophy is taken incredibly seriously. There are strict protocols to prevent the introduction of non-native species. Before anyone travels to the field, their outer gear is thoroughly cleaned to remove any seeds or microbes that might have hitched a ride. It's a monumental effort to minimize our footprint. However, the greatest threat to Antarctica isn't what we bring to it, but what the rest of the world is doing to the climate. Antarctica is on the front lines of climate change, and the changes are happening faster than scientists predicted. The Antarctic Peninsula, in the west, is one of the most rapidly warming places on Earth. Glaciers that have been stable for thousands of years are now retreating at an alarming rate. Massive ice shelves, the floating extensions of glaciers that hold back the ice on land, are thinning and collapsing. The Larsen B ice shelf, an area the size of a small country, disintegrated in a matter of weeks back in 2002. A shocking event that stunned the scientific community. This melting ice has profound global consequences. The Antarctic ice sheet holds about 90% of the world's fresh water. If it were all to melt, global sea levels would rise by nearly 60 meters. While a complete meltdown isn't going to happen overnight, even a small percentage of melt has significant impacts. Scientists are racing to understand how quickly this is happening. They use satellites, radar, and on-the-ground measurements to track the ice. They drill deep into the ice sheet, extracting ice cores that are like time capsules. These cores contain trapped air bubbles from hundreds of thousands of years ago. allowing scientists to reconstruct past climate and see exactly how carbon dioxide levels have changed over time. The data is clear. Today, CO2 levels are higher than at any point in the last 800,000 years. The research is not for the faint of heart. Scientists camp out on the ice for months, enduring extreme cold and isolation, to collect their data. They fly over vast, crevasse-filled glaciers in small planes, equipped with ice-penetrating radar, mapping the bedrock hidden kilometers below the surface. They deploy robotic submarines under the ice shelves to measure water temperature and ocean currents, trying to understand how warmer ocean water is eating away at the ice from below. This is dangerous, cutting-edge work. The data they gather is fed into complex computer models that help us predict future sea level rise. These predictions are vital for coastal communities around the world, giving them time to prepare and adapt. What happens in Antarctica doesn't stay in Antarctica. The continent plays a crucial role in regulating the planet's climate system. The cold, dense water that forms around its coast sinks and drives global ocean circulation, transporting heat around the globe. The vast white ice sheet reflects sunlight back into space, helping to cool the planet. As this ice melts and is replaced by darker ocean or land, more heat is absorbed, creating a feedback loop that accelerates warming. The science is complex, but the message is simple. The health of Antarctica is directly linked to the health of our entire planet. The work being done here isn't just about satisfying scientific curiosity. It's about providing the world with a critical warning. So the next time you see a stunning photograph of a penguin or a majestic iceberg, remember the incredible human story behind it. Remember the logistics teams battling the cold, the scientists working tirelessly on the ice, and the global effort to protect this precious continent. The future of Antarctica, and in many ways, our own future, is being written right now in the data collected from the coldest, driest, and highest continent on Earth. The challenges are immense, but the importance of this work cannot be overstated. The secrets locked in Antarctica's ice are a message to us all, a call to action to protect our shared global home. Thanks for joining us on this journey to the bottom of the world. If you found this fascinating, please give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the amazing science happening all around our planet. Antarctica today stands at a crossroads. It is simultaneously the most protected continent on Earth and the most vulnerable to the global changes humanity has set in motion. The Antarctic Treaty System has preserved the continent as a scientific reserve for over 60 years, an unprecedented achievement in international cooperation. Yet this very isolation, this protection from development and exploitation, has left Antarctica exposed to forces that recognize no boundaries and respect no treaties. Rising temperatures, changing ocean currents, atmospheric chemistry, altered by industrial emissions, half a world away. The continent that defeated so many explorers, that seemed so permanent and unchanging in its frozen vastness, is revealing itself to be fragile in ways those explorers could never have imagined. The legacy of Antarctic exploration is complex and multi-layered. At one level, it is a story of extraordinary human achievement, of individuals pushing themselves beyond normal limits to accomplish seemingly impossible goals. Amundsen's efficient dash to the pole, Scott's tragic journey, Shackleton's miraculous rescue of his men from Elephant Island. These are stories that have inspired generations and will continue to inspire. They speak to fundamental human qualities: courage, determination, leadership, the refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. The men and women who explored Antarctica, from the earliest seal hunters to modern scientists wintering at remote research stations, have demonstrated that humans can adapt to and survive in almost any environment on Earth, no matter how hostile. But the story of Antarctic exploration is also a cautionary tale about the costs of ambition and the dangers of hubris. For every Amundsen who succeeded through careful planning and respect for the environment, there was a Scott who failed through a combination of bad luck, poor decisions, and perhaps an inability to adapt British naval traditions to polar realities. The deaths of Scott, Wilson, and Bowers were preventable tragedies, the result of choices that seemed reasonable at the time but proved fatal in execution. The loss of McIntosh and Hayward on the sea ice was similarly preventable, a consequence of impatience and overconfidence. These deaths serve as reminders that Antarctica does not care about human courage or determination, that good intentions are not sufficient, that success in polar regions requires not just bravery but competence. adaptability, and sometimes simple good fortune. The transformation of Antarctica from a frontier for individual explorers to a laboratory for international science has been largely positive, but it has not been without costs. The romantic vision of the lone explorer battling the elements has given way to the reality of large government programs, complex logistics, and institutional bureaucracy. Modern Antarctic research is extraordinarily valuable, but it lacks the dramatic human element that characterized the heroic age. Few people can name the scientists currently working at the South Pole, but everyone has heard of Scott and Shackleton. This may be unfair to the scientists whose work is arguably more important than the geographical discoveries of their predecessors, but it reflects a deep human need for stories of individual heroism, for narratives of struggle and triumph that science, with its incremental progress and collective effort, often fails to provide. The environmental transformation of Antarctica is perhaps the most troubling aspect of the continent's modern history. For millions of years, Antarctica existed in a state of relative stability, its ice sheets waxing and waning with natural climate cycles, but maintaining a fundamental equilibrium. Human activity has disrupted this equilibrium. The warming caused by greenhouse gas emissions is affecting Antarctica's climate in ways that are only beginning to be understood. The Southern Ocean is warming, not as dramatically as lower latitudes, but enough to matter. Warmer ocean water is penetrating beneath ice shelves, melting them from below in a process that is difficult to observe and hard to reverse. The collapse of ice shelves removes buttresses that have held back glaciers for thousands of years, allowing these glaciers to accelerate and discharge ice into the ocean at unprecedented rates. The consequences of Antarctic ice loss extend far beyond the continent itself. Sea level rise is the most obvious impact, threatening coastal cities and low-lying nations worldwide. But there are other, more subtle effects. The massive influx of fresh water from melting ice is altering ocean circulation patterns. The Southern Ocean plays a crucial role in global ocean circulation, a massive conveyor belt of currents that redistributes heat around the planet. Changes to this circulation could have far-reaching effects on climate patterns worldwide, potentially altering rainfall, storm tracks, and temperatures in regions far from Antarctica. The addition of cold, fresh water from melting ice could slow or even shut down certain circulation patterns, with consequences that are difficult to predict, but potentially severe. Antarctica's ecosystems are also under threat. Krill populations are declining, probably due to a combination of warming waters, reduced sea ice, and the legacy of overfishing. Since krill are the foundation of the Antarctic food web, their decline affects everything from penguins to whales. Some penguin species are seeing population crashes as their primary food source becomes scarcer and their breeding habitats, which depend on sea ice, become less reliable. The Adelie penguin, once common along much of the Antarctic coast, is retreating southward as its preferred habitat disappears. In contrast, gentoo penguins, which prefer ice-free areas, are expanding their range southward as previously frozen areas become accessible. These shifts may seem minor, but they represent fundamental changes to ecosystems that have been stable for thousands of years. The question of Antarctica's future is intimately connected to the broader question of how humanity will address climate change. The continent is a litmus test for international cooperation on environmental issues. If the Antarctic treaty system can be maintained and strengthened, if nations can continue to prioritize science and environmental protection over short-term economic or strategic interests, it would demonstrate that global cooperation on climate issues is possible. If, on the other hand, the treaty system breaks down, if nations begin competing for Antarctic resources, if environmental protections are weakened in favor of mining or other exploitation, it would suggest that humanity lacks the collective wisdom to address existential environmental challenges. There are reasons for both optimism and pessimism about Antarctica's future. On the optimistic side, the Antarctic Treaty has proven remarkably durable, surviving the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and numerous other geopolitical upheavals. New nations continue to join the treaty system, and the principles of peaceful cooperation and scientific research remain widely supported. Environmental protections have been strengthened rather than weakened over time, with mining banned and strict protocols in place to minimize human impact. Scientific understanding of Antarctica has advanced dramatically, providing the knowledge needed to make informed decisions about the continent's future. International collaboration on Antarctic research is thriving, with scientists from dozens of nations working together on shared projects, sharing data, in building collective understanding. On the pessimistic side, the political will to address climate change at the scale required remains uncertain. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions to levels that would stabilize Antarctic ice sheets requires transforming global energy systems, changing how billions of people live and consume, and coordinating action across nations with vastly different priorities and capabilities. This is a challenge of unprecedented scope, and progress has been frustratingly slow. Meanwhile, the changes to Antarctica continue to accelerate. Every year brings new reports of glaciers retreating faster than expected, ice shelves thinning more rapidly than models predicted, ecosystems showing signs of stress. There is a real possibility that by the time humanity develops the political will to act decisively on climate change, it will be too late to prevent catastrophic changes to Antarctica and consequent impacts worldwide. The economic pressures on Antarctica are also likely to increase as mineral resources become scarcer and more expensive globally. As technology makes extraction in extreme environments more feasible, the temptation to exploit Antarctic resources will grow. The environmental protocol's ban on mining is theoretically permanent, but in practice, any treaty can be amended or abandoned if enough nations decide their interests lie elsewhere. China, in particular, has been expanding its Antarctic presence in recent years, building new research stations and conducting extensive surveys that some observers interpret as preparations for future resource exploitation. If one major nation withdraws from the treaty system or begins ignoring its provisions, others may follow, unraveling decades of international cooperation. Tourism presents another challenge. Antarctic tourism has grown from a few hundred visitors in the 1960s to over 70,000 per year in recent seasons. Most of these tourists are responsible and follow strict guidelines, but the sheer numbers raise concerns. Tourists concentrate in a few accessible areas, particularly the Antarctic Peninsula, creating localized but significant impacts. Penguin colonies are disturbed, vegetation is trampled, fuel spills occur. There is also the risk of a major accident. A large cruise ship sinking in Antarctic waters could cause an environmental catastrophe and might require a rescue operation beyond the capabilities of current infrastructure. The COVID-19 pandemic temporarily halted Antarctic tourism, but it is expected to rebound and potentially grow even larger. Finding a balance between allowing people to experience Antarctica and protecting the continent from the impacts of mass tourism is an ongoing challenge. Yet for all these challenges, Antarctica remains a source of wonder and inspiration. The continent's beauty is otherworldly, a landscape of ice and rock and sky that seems to belong to another planet. The wildlife is extraordinary. Penguins marching in absurd formations, seals lounging on ice floes, whales breaching in frigid waters, skuas and petrels soaring on strong wings. The ice itself is alive with color, blue and white and sometimes green or pink, where algae bloom in summer. The light in Antarctica is unlike anywhere else, the low sun creating long shadows and vivid colors. The aurora Australia's draping curtains of green and red across the winter sky. These are sights that change people, that instill a deep appreciation for the natural world and a recognition of its fragility. The scientists who work in Antarctica speak of the privilege of studying such a pristine environment, of the satisfaction of contributing to humanity's understanding of the planet. They describe this sense of perspective that comes from standing at the bottom of the world, surrounded by ice that has existed for thousands or millions of years, aware of being part of a scientific tradition that stretches back to the earliest explorers. Many develop a deep emotional connection to Antarctica, a love for the continent that transcends professional interest. They become advocates for its protection, ambassadors who communicate to the wider world the importance of preserving this last great wilderness. The story of Antarctic exploration is, ultimately, a story about humanity's relationship with nature. It is about the drive to explore, to understand, to conquer, but also about the humility that comes from encountering forces greater than ourselves. Antarctica has humbled some of the greatest explorers in history, reminded them that human will and courage, while admirable, are not always sufficient. Now, in the 21st century, Antarctica is teaching us another lesson, that we have become powerful enough to affect the entire planet, that our actions have consequences, even in the most remote regions, and that, with this power, comes responsibility. The explorers of the heroic age asked themselves how far they could go, how much they could endure, whether they could survive in Earth's harshest environment. The explorers and scientists of today ask different questions. How can we understand what is happening to Antarctica? How can we predict its future? How can we protect it? What do we owe to future generations? These are harder questions, in some ways, than the ones faced by Scott or Shackleton. They require not just courage, but wisdom, not just endurance, but foresight, not just individual achievement, but collective action. The conquest of Antarctica is complete, achieved not through military force or territorial claims, but through scientific understanding and international cooperation. The challenge now is to ensure that this conquest does not become an exploitation, that Antarctica remains what it has become: a continent devoted to peace, science, and the preservation of one of Earth's last great wildernesses. As we look to the future, Antarctica stands as both a warning and a promise. A warning of what can happen when humanity disrupts natural systems without fully understanding the consequences. A promise that international cooperation is possible, that nations can work together for common goals, that science and reason can triumph over short-term interests. The story of how humanity conquered the last continent is not finished. It continues with every scientific paper published, every climate model refined, every international meeting where nations negotiate the future of the Antarctic Treaty. It continues with every person who visits Antarctica and returns changed, with a deeper appreciation for the natural world. And it continues with the ice itself, slowly melting, or perhaps, if humanity rises to the challenge, stabilizing and persisting for future generations to study, to wonder at, and to protect. The last continent conquered may yet become the last continent saved, a testament to what humanity can achieve when we choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over exploitation, and long-term survival over short-term gain.